vexed by free will. Why? Because free will seems impossible. If the world is determined, if every action is caused by a previous action, then we are not free to choose what we do. And if the world is not determined, if actions are random, then we are also not free because randomness allows no choice. But if there is no free will, what happens to moral responsibility? And if no moral responsibility, what happens to moral judgment? And if no moral judgment, what happens to society? What happens to our legal system of crime and punishment? Is free will necessary for moral responsibility? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is my journey to find out. How to understand free will and moral responsibility. How do they intersect? What are the links, conceptual, causal? I go to Florida State University to ask an expert on action theory, Professor Alfred Mele. Al is the leader of the Big Questions in Free Will project, a collaboration of scientists and philosophers that seeks fresh approaches to old questions. Al, what's the relationship between understanding free will and appreciating our moral responsibility as individuals, or indeed society's approach to crime and punishment?
The dominant view in philosophy is that free will is a necessary condition for moral responsibility, so that a person who has no free will is not morally responsible for anything. That's a standard view.
We hear that in the courts, the claim of insanity in crime is a way to be innocent of a crime.
Yeah, so you could think of a free will defense that's an analog of the insanity defense. So the claim would be, well, if you didn't have free will at the time or you didn't do it freely, then you're not morally responsible for it. There are ways to try to separate the two, pull them apart, free will and moral responsibility. You can think about them as different views about places to put the bars. And then you're going to have a bar for moral responsibility too. On one view of free will, all you need to have it is to be sane, rational, no gun to your head, have good information, and make decisions on the basis of the good information you have. So that's a relatively low bar for free will. And you might think, well, that's a good bar for moral responsibility too. But then you might think, oh yeah, but those conditions I gave you and suggested that they were sufficient for free will are consistent with determinism. And you might think, but free will requires that determinism be false. It requires that at the very time at which you act,
I really can do something different.
Yeah, it can, let's say in a deep way, really deep way, can do something different. So then you might raise the bar for free will up to there. But you might think, but the bar for moral responsibility doesn't have to be raised up to there. That can stay down here. Then you have a view according to which moral responsibility doesn't require free will. And why is that? Because you've set the bar for free will higher than the bar for moral responsibility.
The two spectrum are really very different things. One is the deep ontology and the metaphysics of what we're all about in our consciousness. The other is how we have to run society.
Yeah, there are two schools of thought about this, and that is certainly one. So let's have a lower bar for moral responsibility than for free will, for pragmatic reasons. Another school of thought is, no, free will really is required for moral responsibility. And if you think the bar for moral responsibility should be where we set it, relatively low, that's where you need to bring the bar for free will. It isn't really true that in order to be morally responsible for a given thing you do, you have to have done it freely. So here's an example where it looks like you are morally responsible for something you did, but you didn't do it freely. Think about typical drunk driving, and imagine a driver who's so drunk that he doesn't even see the pedestrian he runs over. So we want to say he's morally responsible for running over that pedestrian. Did he freely run him over? No, he didn't even see him. But what the people who have the view I'm describing think is, yeah, that's true, but he wouldn't be morally responsible for running him over if he didn't ever do anything freely that was relevant to his running him over. So suppose that instead of freely drinking and maybe freely getting into his car, some people force-fed him alcohol until he was drunk out of his mind, put him at the wheel of a moving car, turned him loose. We don't blame him, do we, for running over the pedestrian he accidentally runs over. And why not? Because he didn't do anything relevant in the past freely. It was all unfreely done. So, you know, it's a really subtle and interesting set of issues.
Not so simple, I see. Different kinds of free will, different levels of moral responsibility. How then to make progress? Here's the sequence of ideas. Free will, moral responsibility, moral judgment, blame, punishment, perhaps prison. Each a separate concept, but each required in sequence to understand the next. Two basic questions. What is morality? Because moral responsibility depends on morality. And what happens to moral responsibility if one denies free will? I ask Thalia Wheatley, a professor of social neuroscience at Dartmouth, who doubts free will.
I think we first have to define our terms, because free will can mean lots of different things, but morality also, we're just using one word there,
Right.
but it's not clear that it's one unified thing. For example, you can think that it would be immoral to eat your dog, or you can think it's immoral to cheat on your taxes. And it's not clear that those are really the same kind of judgment you make.
Well, that's interesting. How can you determine, is it in fact one sense of morality that's just expressed in two ways, or two radically different kinds of things that we're constructing?
Well, one experiment we've done to help answer that question is to write scenarios that are either disgusting or harmful or dishonest. So you've got disgusting scenarios, but they're not harmful, they're not dishonest. And you've got harmful ones that are not disgusting or dishonest, and dishonest ones that are not harmful or disgusting. So you could cleanly separate these types of moral judgments.
Can you give me some examples without being too offensive to me?
Okay, disgusting. Man is walking through the woods, and he comes across a dead deer, and he decides to have sex with the deer. He uses a condom. There's no harm involved. There's no consent issues.
It is disgusting.
It is disgusting, but it's not harmful and it's not dishonest, right? It's just purely very disgusting.
Right.
Then there's the case of harm. So, for example, two people are walking upstairs and one says something to make fun of the other person, and the other person hits them back really hard and they tumble back down the stairs.
It's harmful.
It's harmful, but it's not dishonest or disgusting.
Okay.
And then there's cases where there's dishonesty. For example, the bank makes an error and puts a little more money in your checking account than what you really should get from your salary. You don't tell the bank, that's dishonest. It's not disgusting, it's not harmful.
Okay.
You've got these cleanly separated. And then we see what happens in the brain when you're processing these kinds of transgressions.
And what do you find?
Well, we find that very different systems are used for each of these different kinds of transgressions. So there doesn't seem to be a moral center, a moral module in the brain in any kind of monolithic sense. You seem to recruit different kinds of reasoning areas to understand these different things.
So what's the implication of that? It seems like then the generalized question of what's the relationship between free will and morality is a kind of an artificial question, because
Yes.
we're dealing with more complex subsystems to get at really how it's working.
That's exactly right. And we can't really answer the question of what the relationship is between free will and morality until we really understand what we're dealing with morality. What does morality mean?
And so as you have these different components that build up into the construct of morality, how might free will affect each one?
Well, I'm not sure I believe in the kind of free will that a lot of people do in terms of a conscious free will, a conscious ability to not do one thing versus the other. But we are responsible for our behavior. But how morally responsible we are, yet that is wrapped up in the free will question. And because I don't really believe in a conscious free will, it makes questions of moral responsibility a bit iffy for me to say.
I like dissecting morality. by teasing apart activities that may be disgusting or harmful or dishonest, but not the others. Thalia argues that morality comes in different flavors without an absolute moral core or a moral module in the brain. She goes further and denies both free will and moral responsibility. Not only is there no moral core, she says, there is no conscious free will either. But what really counts in determining moral responsibility? A technical concept of free will or a personal sense of agency? I go to University College London to ask neuroscientist Patrick Haggard. Patrick is an expert in analyzing brain responses under different conditions.
The point about sense of agency is it gives us this feeling of controlling events in the outside world. And if we control events in the outside world, then we may be responsible for what those events are. And one of our interesting questions that we've asked is there a difference between how we experience agency over arbitrary, if you like, cold event, like a beep, and something which is actually significant? So we've done some simple experiments where we've asked people to make an action, and instead of the action being followed by a beep a quarter of a second later, it's followed by what one might call a moral vignette.
What's an example?
Okay, so the very standard example is a situation where there is a train coming down a track and it's at a fork, and you have the ability to divert it onto one or other of the two forks of the track. And there are 5 railway workers on one of the forks of the track, and there's 1 railway worker on the other. So it's currently heading down the fork of the track where it's going to run over 5 railway workers and kill them. And you have the capacity to press the button, switch the points, and divert the train onto the other fork of the track where there's 1 railway worker working. So you will intervene in that situation, but you will then be responsible for the death of that railway worker. You'll avoid the deaths of the 5 on the other track, but you'll be, in some real sense, responsible for that 1. So we did a very simple experiment where we asked the person to press a button to divert or not divert the train from the track that it was currently running on. And then a quarter of a second later, you saw a picture which showed how many unfortunate railway workers your train had run over as a result of your action in this scenario. And we measured exactly the same temporal shrinkage. In other words, the temporal experience of a close association between what I did and what happened. In this moral scenario, as opposed to the simple scenario where you press a button and hear a beep.
A neutral
one. And the interesting finding was that people experience a tighter temporal coupling. They experience more of this temporal shrinkage or temporal binding when their actions have morally significant consequences compared to when they have completely neutral consequences.
Now, this shrinkage is a brain-manufactured shrinkage. It's not there in the real world. In the real world, there is a duration that's constant and immutable.
Exactly. So I think what this means is that when we're in a context where our actions are significant, and particularly morally significant, then we have an enhanced sense of agency.
Can we infer about the nature of agency because it is stronger in moral situations as opposed to neutral ones?
We can infer that you would need a sense of agency. You'd need the ability to associate what you do with what happens in order to have moral responsibility. I think you couldn't have moral responsibility unless you first had a sense of agency. Okay. So I think sense of agency is all about identifying and encoding the relations between what I do and the salient or important consequences of my own activity. Because if I can understand the crucial ways that I can change my environment and generate a strong experience of how I'm able to influence the world, that is clearly important for survival and for the success of the organism. I think that in the social world and for social animals such as us, you can really use moral and social as more or less synonyms. So the really important actions that I make are the ones which have effects on you and effects on other people.
To Patrick, moral responsibility depends on personal agency, and personal agency depends on both the nature of free will and the moral significance of the personal action. But since free will assumes personal agency, free will and moral responsibility are intertwined in a kind of descriptive circularity. How to escape the circle? One way is to see that free will and moral responsibility do not exist in isolation. Interpersonal, social, and cultural factors play crucial roles. That's why I go back to Florida State University to meet social psychologist Roy Baumeister.
Well, in very plain terms, the idea of free will is that the person could act differently. A moral judgment is essentially a judgment about should that person have acted differently. The same with a legal judgment, that should the person have done something else rather than rob the liquor store. So the judgment that the person should act differently is based on the assumption that the person could act differently. So to my way of thinking, at least in this very simple sense of free will, that is essential to moral responsibility. Now, the argument goes the other way too. Why did we evolve free will? Why we develop that capacity? The ability to act morally is one of the crucial things that makes us human, that enables us to function well. One of the most basic norms is reciprocity. All other cultures do, if you do something to me, I should do it back to you. That's a kind of moral idea. But to control our behavior by it and actually pay someone back for something they've done for us, that requires a sense of moral responsibility, requires that higher mentality. It makes culture work, but it makes it possible. Sense of fairness is another thing that is fairly universal in human cultures. So developing this better sense of moral responsibility was crucial for our developing of culture, and goes with this new way of controlling our behaviors that I think goes by the name free will.
So let's look at these two categories of ideas. The moral responsibility came about because we wanted to have a society for other reasons. We have to live in groups. Free will has to do with the concept of self-control. So how do these two articulate?
Well, moral rules are mostly rules to restrain individual selfishness so you can do what's better for the group. So self-control, very simply, is the ability to change your behavior, to do this instead of that, to override in particular what you might feel like doing in order to do something else. So we call sometimes self-control the moral muscle, but it's also the trait that enables you to resist selfish impulses and do what's morally right.
You talk about a moral muscle that your research has shown to be more than just a cute metaphor, but a serious metaphor. How so?
We find that self-control, like a muscle, it gets tired when you use it a bunch in a day. So the tendency for someone to do something immoral will increase temptation after temptation if they're a bunch in the same day. On the other hand, as you use the muscle over time, it becomes stronger, just like a physical muscle. When we rebelled against all these arbitrary rules, like
Roy relates moral responsibility to the proper functioning of society and makes the intriguing claim that this is why free will emerged in evolution. His claim is startling, actually, because it reverses the direction of causality, from the traditional free will to moral responsibility to a revisionist moral responsibility to free will. What about Roy's research that the self-control required to make moral decisions is like a muscle, exhausted by repeated use, growing when exercised? This suggests an operational nexus between free will and moral responsibility. How to explore the strength and structure of this connection? Are there unifying theories that might explain how free will and moral responsibility relate? I ask a philosopher specializing in law and neuroscience, Walter Sinnott-Armstrong. How do you build this relationship between free will and moral responsibility?
What we're talking about with responsibility, I take it, is the kind of condition that makes someone liable to punishment or sanction of some sort. So to say that someone's responsible is to say that they are the kind of creature who is appropriately subject to some kind of negative sanction or punishment. Then there are going to be a lot of different theories about when people are responsible in that sense. There are mesh theories where the question is whether your desires fit together in the right way. So an addict who can't control whether or not they take drugs, well, they're still going to be responsible if they're happy being an addict, but they're not going to be responsible if they wish they could quit and they've tried and they failed. The main competing theory in philosophy these days is the reasons responsiveness theory, that you're responsible when you're able to respond to reasons. First, you can detect when you have a reason to do something or not to do it, and then you act accordingly. If you have a reason to do it, you do it. If you have a reason not to do it, you don't do it. For example, someone is a compulsive hand washer. They wash their hands 10 times an hour. They know they don't need to. Matter of fact, they know they have a reason not to wash their hands because their hands are getting raw. They're not responding to the reasons for and against washing their hands, so they're not responsible for washing their hands. But I actually hold a theory that I think, in a way, captures both of the truths behind those approaches. It's called the deep self theory. And the idea is that you're responsible for actions when those actions issue from you. And one might say that the fact that your desires mesh in the right way shows that it's part of your deep self. You might say that the fact that you're responding to the relevant reasons shows that it's part of your deep self. But there's more to it than that. There was an individual who lived in Virginia in the year 2000. He was a pretty normal person who had, in his second marriage, had married someone with a daughter already. So he had a stepdaughter, who I believe was about 10 or 12 years old at the time. And he was perfectly normal and started to collect pornography all of a sudden. And by the summer, he was collecting child pornography. And in September of that year, he molested his stepdaughter. They convicted him of child molestation. And by October, he was losing coordination, and he was soliciting staff in the sex treatment program that he had been committed to. All of a sudden, they have to kick him out of this program, send him to jail right before he's sentenced, and they do an MRI, and sure enough, he's got a big right orbital frontal tumor, which they take out, and when they take it out, he's fine. No more desire to have sex with kids. But then 10 months later, tumor grows back. Now he's got that desire back again. They take it out again, then it's gone again. It looks, for all the evidence that we've got, like the tumor is causing this behavior, not him. And what's making him do these things is something outside himself. And that's, I think, the basic intuition behind saying he's not really morally responsible.
Well, that leads directly into the relationship with free will, because then your claim would be that that tumor caused him in some way not to have free will, that his behavior was constrained.
Right. And that's just what freedom is. It's lack of constraints.
Yeah, some would claim that, great, Walter, you have me now on a slippery slope. So if something on my brain can do it, maybe my brain can do it itself. And by the end of the argument, nobody's responsible for anything.
Right. And I think it doesn't go all the way down the slope. So the burden is going to be, where do you draw the line between the tumor case and the normal person to be able to say these people are responsible and those people are not responsible? And my answer to that question is, you shouldn't ask, is someone responsible or not, as if there's an on-off switch and bam, this person is, that person's not. There are going to be degrees of responsibility. Part of the problem is that the law often wants to say, this person's guilty, we're going to send them to prison, or they're not guilty and we're going to let them out. That forces a dichotomy in a situation that really is essentially a continuum.
Is free will required for moral responsibility? Who should be held morally responsible for criminal acts? How should society make moral judgments? Here's current thinking. For people to be held morally responsible for their actions, most philosophers require a robust free will where they could have done otherwise. Others claim that free will itself is an illusion. which means that there is no real moral responsibility. More subtly, free will and moral responsibility can each be teased apart, making the problem more complex. Another approach is that the concept of free will is too abstract, and better is the more practical sense of agency. Historically, moral responsibility and judgments were created to forge social communities. Only by appreciating free will and moral responsibility separately and then together can we get closer to truth.
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com. This program was supported in part by a grant from the John Templeton Foundation.